Five of the Best is an opinion-based series on films which I have seen released during the chosen year. This is to celebrate previous years in film, not to cause any offence. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to 5 of the Best, the series in which we celebrate movies year by year. This video will consist of me discussing my 5 favourite films from this chosen year. This video we'll be discussing the year 2016, so let's get started. Before we get into our top 5, here are the honourable mentions for this year. 10 Cloverfield Lane, The Girl on the Train, The Edge of 17, Fences, Captain America Civil War, The Nice Guys, War Dogs, The Accountant, Manchester by the Sea, Sully, Train to Busan, and The Conjuring 2. Now, let's get on to the list and start with number 5. Split is directed by M. Night Shyamalan and stars James McAvoy and Anya Taylor-Joy. Now straight off the bat I have to tell you that Split was one of these films that I hadn't seen before I started 5 of the Best. It approached the year of 2016 when I was about to make this video, and I went, there's a few movies I want to watch before I do this video, just in case there's any that sneak into the top 5. And lo and behold, Split was exactly that. And the reason for that is because simply of one person. Not that Anya Taylor-Joy isn't great in this, she's been better in other things, but she's a decent protagonist. But everything that is good, everything that's encapsulating of what the vision of the director and the storytelling of this movie is down to James McAvoy. His performance as, is it like 10 different characters? 12 different characters? All these different personalities? There's so many that I think even the fans of the film, that they're divided on how many actually are portrayed, if they're secret personalities. And that's just the layers of depth. You know, I can imagine when James McAvoy, when he received this script, I'm sure he didn't even know where to start. But to bring so much character to so many varying personalities and all to feel so believable, because all it takes is one of these to go, well, he kind of didn't hit the mark with that, and this whole film falls apart. I think this is James McAvoy's best acting performance, and he's had some great performances in this kind of decade. A lot of different brilliant outings. He's appeared already on 5 of the Best, but Split is, it's one of the, when I think about movies, and I think about movies that rely solely on one fantastic performance, and there's so many like that, you know, especially films with a very core set of 1 or maybe 2 characters, a bit like Split, where yes, there is a few surrounding characters, but everything about this is the dynamic between James McAvoy and Anya Taylor-Joy. And Anya Taylor-Joy is essentially the baseline, the normal person, and James McAvoy is this villain with so many personalities. And not normal in the sense of what James McAvoy isn't normal. This is certainly, it explores such depth. And especially if you've never met someone with split personalities, it's something, it's handled in a way that, yes, he is the villain, but it's handled in quite a, I mean, I'm not maybe best suited to talk about this, but I would imagine when you watch this film, it's approached in a way that's quite delicate and quite, they've done their research basically, from what I see. Again, I could be proven wrong on that, I'm happy to be wrong, but from what I see, there wasn't too much backlash to the film either in that regard. But to handle it so well, to portray so many varying personalities, and it's not like they are different shades of the same colour. James McAvoy brings complete differentiation between the personalities. Some are calmer, some are angrier, some are more flamboyant, some are quite quiet and stoic. The difference and the contrast between everything about Split relies on James McAvoy. And as I said there, with there's only a handful of movies that I can think in recent memory that are like this, where if one performance falls down, one sole performance isn't up to 110% like this is, the movie isn't great. But because it is, because it's fantastic, and James McAvoy cannot be credited enough with how good this is. Split is an awesomely engaging film, intriguing film throughout, and it's one of those ones that I did go into this year, and I actually, when I looked through the list and I went, oh, I actually have not seen that. And did I go into it expecting it to break into the top 5? No, because a few of those honourable mentions that you've just seen, I debated putting 2 of them in, and I actually bumped 2 of them out, which we'll get to in a minute when we talk about it. But that was something that I was pretty sure, no matter which of these surrounding films that I hadn't seen for 2016, I was pretty sure the 5 wouldn't change. And Split was so good, and his performance is so good. And also, let's talk a little bit about M. Night Shyamalan, because talk about a hit and miss, and, you know, director. Because so many films, especially kind of late 90s, early 2000s, that were great. He's appeared before in the films like Signs, obviously things like The Sixth Sense, where, you know, there's brilliance in Shyamalan, but there's also so many stinkers. There's so many films that just do not hit the mark for me, and for, I would imagine, a majority of people that seen the films. Yes, there's people that love all of Shyamalan's films, and that's fair enough. People are entitled to enjoy what they enjoy. But for me, M. Night Shyamalan either has a complete win or a complete stinker. There's never really a middle ground. And I feel with Split, it definitely falls in the category of like an absolute win for Shyamalan. Split is awesome. Split is a film that I would recommend going in with very little knowledge of. Hopefully I've not said too much about the film, bar of course the premise, which is the split personality situation with James McAvoy. I would recommend this film. I think everybody has something to be intrigued by Split, and I would definitely recommend it. Number 4. Deadpool is directed by Tim Miller and stars, of course, Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. So where do we start when talking about Deadpool? Deadpool is a really interesting film. Of course, I'm sure you know it probably as well as I do, which is it was a film that the studio didn't want to make, and then somebody leaked the first scene, the famous scene on the bridge at the start of the film, and then the film got commissioned, it got greenlit, and here we are with Deadpool 1 and then Deadpool 2, and on the way is Deadpool 3, and I would imagine there'll be an involvement in the MCU in some capacity. So it all kind of birthed from that leaked footage, and I'm so happy it did, because Deadpool in general is one of my favourite MCU. No, it's not MCU, it's just Marvel. Maybe, as I say, it will kind of tie into that. Yes, it's tied in some ways to the X-Men universe, but it's definitely one of my favourite Marvel characters. Deadpool 1 and 2 are 2 of my favourite Marvel movies. They're so enjoyable because I think it's the freshness of not... You would expect the studio to hold a lot of things back. A lot of fourth wall breaking, a lot of language. I mean, you know, it's one of the rare 18 rated films or you know, NC-17 films in the States, which really, it was clear that they just went, Brian, Tim in directing, do what you like. Do what you like, hopefully it'll be good. And they got the free rein, they ad-libbed a lot of the lines, a lot of the, you know, improvised offhand comments or references are so... They don't seem hammed in. They seem... They're well placed. It's a genuinely hilarious film. It has enjoyable action as well. Like, quite enjoyably heartfelt moments between the characters, especially between Wade and Vanessa as the kind of main love story. I know it's played as kind of like a jokey love story, and yes, there is, of course, with the fourth wall breaking in the comedy, but there is quite serious moments too. Deadpool is, I think it was a shock more than anything, because at this time we're very in the midst of the Infinity Saga. We're very much in a Marvel mind of, right, no matter how much we see, we're not going to get past a certain level of brutality. We're not going to get past a certain level of, bad language. You're not going to get any, there was certainly a level of what was MCU and then what was Marvel in general. And with Deadpool, I think it being so self-aware, and of course that's what the characters essentially prides itself on, is just being so, like someone looking from the outside looking in to Marvel movies as a whole. In this instance, it's more the X-Men universe and kind of poking holes at that. Of course, there's pokes at holes in, is it Charles Xavier as Patrick Stewart, or is it him as James McAvoy? There's James McAvoy's second mention of the day. But yes, and they're played off so well, and it's clear that they know what the fan base knows. It's clear they knew the jokes that would connect with the fan base. And that's really rewarding as an audience member watching this. I think, it was the surprise factor. It's a character I didn't know of in any kind of capacity. I'm not a massive comic book guy. I don't have any or large prior knowledge to a lot of these characters, bar their movie involvement. So for Deadpool appearing in, well, it was one of those bad X-Men movies, or was it the Wolverine? One of them where he just is Ryan Reynolds with swords. There's no real connection to Deadpool. Not this Deadpool anyway. He's obviously named the same character. But it's clear there was a love here. It was clear that Ryan Reynolds really, it was like a passion project. I know that word and that term gets thrown about so much now, but it was clear that this is a passion project for him. And really, what Ryan Reynolds set here, essentially, and this might sound like a knock on him a little bit, but a lot of his characters and basically everything he's been in since basically follows the same kind of trend. He's essentially the same character. I talked a little bit about this whenever I talked about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, which is he essentially plays himself in every role, and you could definitely attribute that to Ryan Reynolds as well. But the Ryan Reynolds character, and I say that in quotation marks, I don't know if that's, but he is very similar. If you think of all of his performances in Deadpool, in Free Guy, even in Hobbs and Shaw when he's in at the very start, it's clearly the same. Even in Detective Pikachu, even just his voice, it's clearly the same humour, the same kind of references and jokes. Obviously to varying levels of brutality or swearing or anything like that. But Deadpool is just such an enjoyable time, and it's clear, as I say, that everybody involved was so glad to be making this, and that comes across to the audience. And I think at this point, obviously I love the second film too. I love both of these, Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2. And I think the character is one of the most fun comic book characters, if not the most fun comic book character to watch, just to bring that freshness, and where everybody else is being at least somewhat serious in their roles, and of course that's because they have to be. Deadpool brings a fresh feeling to it, and kind of breathes new life to a kind of hit and miss genre of superheroes. Maybe not around this time. Around this time in 2016 and kind of late, 2010s, the superhero movies were probably at their peak. You had a lot of films, Logan, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon. You had the Deadpool movies. You had kind of the closing of the Infinity Saga, getting around the time of Infinity War and Endgame. And that's probably as good as superhero movies have ever been on a consistent basis that I can think of. Of course, I'd be happy to prove wrong, but from what I can see, that's kind of like the definitive era. And will it be able to get there again? Who knows? But this time in particular, this kind of era of comic book movies, and this first Deadpool is one of the shining lights of that, because it's so enjoyable, and as I say, it's that comes across in a lot of movies, a lot of great movies. It's clear that everybody involved is not only wanting to do a great job, but is clearly enjoying the project, enjoying the work, and enjoying that they're getting to make this, whether that be a massive blockbuster, whether that be an indie film, or whether that be something that had been told, you're never going to get to make this, so move on. And in this case, that was what they were told. Deadpool was never going to be made. And then one leaked video, one brilliant fan reaction on Twitter to it, and here we are, with Deadpool being one of the most fun characters. So the internet and Twitter as a whole ain't always too bad. It can be bad, so it could be wrong, but in this case, and a few cases like it, sometimes a bit of good fan reaction and the odd leak can do the world of good. Number 3. La La Land is directed by Damien Chazelle and stars Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone. So a little bit of story time with La La Land before we get into what I loved about this film. I was not going to go and see this film. I, around this time, went, what would I like a musical for? That's not for me. That's not my kind of thing. I wouldn't enjoy that. Wise up, I'm not going to see La La Land. And who was this I said this to? My own mother. She said, go with me to the cinema. Go with me and see La La Land. You might enjoy it. I went, Mum, no, I won't enjoy it. Not for me. And then I just thought, do you know what? I'm bored. Mum, okay, we'll go then. She was really happy. She says, oh yes, that'll be good. Because she grew up on musicals. She loved things like Grease, in particular, always comes to mind. Other things like Dirty Dancing, of course, isn't fully a musical, but is a very musical orientated film. And she had seen a lot of the trailers and been basically thought this is like a new film that it re-encapsulates that era of Hollywood, and of course not in exactly the same way, but it feels like an old school musical. And I know she was saying all this to me, and I was still going, I won't care, Mum, because it's a musical and it's just not my kind of thing. And then we went, and I think La La Land is the greatest musical I have seen. Now, again, before anybody goes, have you not seen blah blah blah? I haven't seen a lot of them, if you haven't guessed from what I was saying there before that. Yes, I've seen Grease. It's great for what it is, and a few others. But I think the storytelling and the character dynamic between Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone in La La Land is fantastic. And I want to talk, just to start this off really when talking about the movie, I want to start by talking about Damien Chazelle. Now, he appeared about a video or two back when I talked about Whiplash. And in more recent times I talked about Babylon. And he's only really had a handful of movies, big time movies, and with what a batting average he has when it comes to these movies, because Whiplash and La La Land and Babylon, obviously three that include a lot of music, some fantastic scores, some of the best scores in recent memory. Of course, with Whiplash it being the drums themselves, in La La Land it being very much the musical, and in Babylon having one of the most uniquely memorable scores in the last couple of years. So the music is clearly such a big part of storytelling for Damien Chazelle, and for his musical, for La La Land, and let's not beat about the bush, La La Land won like every Oscar that year. Basically every Oscar that was going, it won. Obviously that isn't the case, but it felt like that because it won everything. So it wasn't like this wasn't critically acclaimed. But La La Land, I think it was, and you've heard me say this before when I talk about movies, especially movies I don't think I would enjoy. And they're the ones that really exceed my expectation. I actually think I came out of La La Land liking it more than my mum did. She enjoyed it, but I just thought the storytelling in this was so much more refined. And yes, the music, there's a few songs in it, something like City of Stars is memorable, song and did quite well. But it actually wasn't the music that sold it to me. It wasn't the soundtrack really that made me love the film. I enjoyed it, and there's a lot of memorable tracks in it, and rightly is one of the best parts of it. But it was the performances. Ryan Gosling has appeared on 5 of the Best a good lot of times now, and for good reason. Ryan Gosling is brilliant, and this is such another string to his bow. Such another brilliant string to his bow with, I did not think to have him as a singing, dancing lead in a musical. And Emma Stone coming out of La La Land as a superstar. There's no way around it. And whether this becomes her defining role or there's others in the future that eclipse this, Emma Stone is fantastic in this, and I think she's definitely the best part. It's much a muchness with the two of them. With Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone are both fantastically engaging. Some really memorable and iconic shots. The ones from the poster are parts of the movie, which doesn't happen all the time. And it really feels like a movie that was made in like the 50s or the 60s. It really encapsulates, of course I wasn't born, and probably a lot of you guys wouldn't have been born at the time, but it certainly encapsulates that kind of era of storytelling in Hollywood. And, people wanted to make themselves this actor, they want to be these larger-than-life characters. And while, yes, it is larger than life in the sense of people bursting into song in random situations, yes, that's any musical that's ever been made, let's be honest, but it also feels quite grounded, and I think that was why I enjoyed it the most. All of these other films, something like Grease, I suppose Grease is the one to be using as an example, because it's one of those iconic and definitely one of the most memorable musicals ever. The thing about Grease is it's clearly a bit of a story to get you from song to song, whereas in La La Land, the music is just an addition to the overall story being told, and that's the biggest difference between the two. And that's why me, as someone who adores storytelling in cinema, that's why I really loved La La Land. Again, as I said, I'm not this musical aficionado. I am not well versed in the genre, I have to say, but am I more open to seeing musicals now because of La La Land? Absolutely. Was my mum right? Yes. Do I begrudge her for it? No, because it was me being stubborn and going, well, I don't like them, so I'm not going to bother. And that would have been a hindrance to me. I wouldn't have seen this film out of my own unwillingness to open my mind to different genres of film. And we've talked about this a few times, about films that you wouldn't think you'd enjoy. Talking about Damien Chazelle, and since he's in question, and since we're talking about him, and I talked about this when I talked about Whiplash, which was, do I care about drumming? Absolutely not. Is Whiplash one of the best films I've seen that year? Absolutely. Is La La Land... Am I a musical fan? I wasn't before this. Did I think La La Land would be in my top 5? No, I didn't even think it would be an honourable mention. And lo and behold, here it is as my 3rd favourite film of this year. And I would recommend it. I think even people who aren't that fussed, a bit like myself, coming into this, there's a lot to love in La La Land. There really is. From performances, to memorable songs, to overall feeling, great story moments. Yeah. La La Land is great. It deserved all the acclaim it got, deserved all those Oscars. And yeah, I would definitely recommend it, and I didn't think I would going into it. So the moral of the story is, listen to your mum if she's telling you to go and see something different. Well, that's my moral anyway. Number 2. Rogue One is directed by Gareth Edwards and stars Felicity Jones, Diego Luna, and Mads Mikkelsen. So here we are in 2016 amidst the very birth of Star Wars, Disney Star Wars as we would call it, which is just, we've now bought Star Wars and we're going to make a lot of things. And we had The Force Awakens recently, and then in the middle of that we're going to do a wee spin-off. And the spin-off is going to be set just before A New Hope. It's going to lead into the film. A New Hope, of course, being the first Star Wars which released all those years ago, and in my mind is one of the most iconic films, if not the most influential film in history, because of what it did to sci-fi, what it did to storytelling on a more grander scale. A New Hope, or Star Wars, whichever one you call it, is truly one of the best films ever. Yeah, I'm pretty safe saying that. So to bring, fair play to Disney, because they had the balls to go, right, first thing we're going to do, yes, we're going to make our own new trilogy, and we've talked about that, so I'm not going to talk about it, but we're going to do a lead-up story that builds in to exactly where Star Wars begins. The starting scene of where Darth Vader and Princess Leia and Alderaan gets exploded and all that stuff at the very start of one of the most influential films and the start of a franchise that is maybe the biggest in the world, certainly in movies. We're going to lead into that. So basically, Rogue One needed to be good. And was Rogue One good? Rogue One is simply one of the best Star Wars films, in my mind. Now, not everybody loves Rogue One. I know people go, oh, well, the last half an hour's good, but I don't really like all of that leading up to it. I disagree, actually. And while the core characters are good, especially Felicity Jones and Diego Luna, and we'll talk about performances in a minute, but the overall cast, maybe they aren't all as strong as the core cast in, the iconic Star Wars scenarios with, Han Solo and Chewbacca and everything. But what this has is a lot of heart. And it has a brilliant through line of storytelling with Felicity Jones's character as she is in a situation as a child and leads through to what eventually becomes the story of what Rogue One is. And her connection with her father and Mads Mikkelsen, who of course has appeared on Five of the Best a few times, and rightly so. He is brilliant. He brings so much of it's clear that Mads Mikkelsen, I think at any point, he should be in like every franchise in some capacity. Whether it's James Bond, he was the best film. Whether it's something like the MCU, sadly he was misused in the MCU in the Doctor Strange movie. I thought he would have made a bigger villain, would have done better as like a big bad in something like that. Of course, he's appearing in Indiana Jones in the Dial of Destiny. So I think there's always a capacity for Mads Mikkelsen in these. But someone who was completely new to me going into this was Diego Luna. Now, of course, now we have Andor, the Disney Plus show, and that fleshes that out a lot more. His character and his character development and his story. But overall, Rogue One, we could talk about all that, but simply, this film didn't need to be made. And I suppose the argument could be made, no film needs to be made, no sequel needs to be made, etc., etc. But for Disney to, and Kathy Kennedy and whoever, made the call to make Rogue One, and to get such a great cast, and Felicity Jones as our lead, it isn't my favourite performance of hers. My favourite performance of hers is in Theory of Everything, the Stephen Hawking's film. But she is brilliant in this. Everybody's doing a great job. It's clear, and again, I harken back to what I was saying earlier. It's clear when people involved in a project really put the care in. And contrasting to that, it's really clear when people don't care about a project. And Star Wars has had varying instances of both examples, which has been, yes, we've had die-hard love for the project and can put so much time and effort into it. Something like The Mandalorian, it's clearly a love letter to Star Wars. Rogue One, I would put the category of a love letter to Star Wars. Things like The Rise of Skywalker, not so much. So this is what I mean. It's clear that there's a love of the project being carried out. Gareth Edwards as a director is someone that I can't say I'm too familiar with, but what he does, he definitely recaptures and encapsulates a lot of the brilliance of old style Star Wars, the original trilogy Star Wars, and it's clear that there isn't a contrast in tone. Yes, there's a lot of the visuals from like the Revenge of the Sith era, and of course with The Force Awakens, and that the improved visuals is of course a plus factor in this. But to have the same feel as, you know, the original trilogy, even though it's a lot of years later, a hell of a lot of years later, to have the same space battles with a lot of the same characters, getting great outings. Darth Vader, of course, isn't a shock, or isn't a spoiler that he is in this in a capacity, and is done justice. There's just a lot to love in Rogue One. I didn't go into this knowing too much about it, in truth, because we had just had The Force Awakens so fresh on our minds, and because this was like a left turn with Star Wars, it's like, okay, yes, we have our new trilogy, but actually in the middle of that we're going to do our own wee thing. We're going to do our own different movies and different tales, and it's, you know, these Star Wars stories. Rogue One, a Star Wars story. Solo, a Star Wars story, and they are their own thing, but they obviously tie into the overarching story, and a lot of it being connected to the original trilogy, which of course is the prime Star Wars. I've talked about my love for Revenge of the Sith, but let's be honest, the prime Star Wars is undoubtedly the original trilogy, and it probably always will be for that. I can't see, no matter how many different things they make with Star Wars, it's clear that the original 3 films as a whole will always stand the test of time as one of the most brilliant trilogies, most influential trilogies. And to have this as kind of like an icing on the cake, a cherry on top of the icing, because do you need Rogue One to enjoy A New Hope? Absolutely not. But is it a wonderful addition? Because as soon as I finish watching Rogue One, I want to watch A New Hope, and then consequently I want to watch Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and then there we are. It's 4 films, and that's what this had to do. That's all Rogue One had to do. Reignite, if it had been lost for anybody, the love of Star Wars. And yes, Star Wars, as whenever I do talk about it, has varying success. There's some really good things, there's some not so good things, there's some real stinkers. But everybody loves their own thing, Star Wars. But Rogue One for me is definitely up there with the best films. It doesn't touch the original trilogy, but it brilliantly complements it, and that is all it had to do. That's what Disney Star Wars needs to be, and still needs to be, no matter what they do with it next. It needs to complement what is there, not ruin the franchise as a whole, or be lazy with their storytelling, or just get things done for the sake of them being done. Craft the plan to continue to complement a fantastic, because that's what it's all about. It still stems from the stories being told in the first 3 films all those years ago. That's all it needs to be. And Rogue One, when I came out of this, and don't forget, there had only been 2 Disney Star Wars movies at this time, Force Awakens and Rogue One. So I came out of this going, oh my god, thank god Disney bought Star Wars. What came in the coming years was fine, but not so good, especially in some scenarios. Rise of Skywalker comes to mind. So, but looking back on this, Rogue One was undoubtedly one of my favourite films of this year, and it's a movie that I would definitely go back and watch semi-frequently, because if I'm in a Star Wars mood and I go, well, I don't know if I want to watch, as I say, I don't want to watch the original trilogy, so I'll watch Rogue One, and then I really enjoy it and I go, sure, I'll stick on New Hope, and then I'm locked in again. That's all it takes. And that's what a good prequel should be. That's what a good continuation of a story, whether it's a necessity or not, whether it's needed, whether it's worthwhile doing, or whether the fans demanded it or not, to have this, and to have this done so well, with some great performances, some stunning visuals. Some of the best visuals in all of Star Wars are in this. Some of the explosions, some of the memorable scenes throughout it, some of the sound design. So much of Rogue One is brilliant. Special, and yes, that last half an hour is particularly special. But the film as a whole, I love. I love Rogue One. And to be honest, on most years it probably would be top. It would be number 1. But it's not this year. Because my number 1 this year is Number 1. Hacksaw Ridge is directed by Mel Gibson and stars Andrew Garfield, Sam Worthington, and Vince Vaughn. Now, if you've been on and following the series, you'll know that I really do appreciate a good war film. A war film that really stands out. Because there's a lot, and they kind of can have their different levels and varying effects of, is it good or is it not so good in war films? But something with Hacksaw Ridge is particularly unique because it's a war film that focuses so much on being a pacifist and being not willing to abide by the normal laws of war, and have someone like Andrew Garfield, which not too long ago before this we had The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is not a good movie. We know that. It's not good. But one thing is clear, especially if you haven't seen Hacksaw Ridge and you think to yourself, is Andrew Garfield even that good of an actor? You watch Hacksaw Ridge and then you go, yes, he is a very good actor. It's as simple as that. Because his conveyance of the conflict of his scenario being he's a religious man who doesn't want to take up arms and doesn't want to get involved with war, and you can see his reasoning, the storytelling to build the effectiveness of the audience connecting with his character in this scenario. We want him to succeed. We understand his reasoning for going so much against the norm of taking up arms when you're thrown into a wartime scenario and war in general. But another performance that kind of gets overlooked, which I think is absolutely fantastic and goes so much above the norm of what I thought they had in their locker, is Vince Vaughn. Now, Vince Vaughn, in my eyes, up to this, was always a comedy actor. Whether it be Anchorman or Dodgeball, you name it. He's always involved in comedies, and he's great in comedies. Don't get that twisted, because he has great comedic timing. He is great. Like, he's so well suited to that genre. So to see him as an army sergeant in this movie, at first I was like, that's a really weird shout, really weird decision to put him there. But it's absolutely the right one. Vince Vaughn, yes, Andrew Garfield is the arrowhead of what's so good about this movie, of course. But Vince Vaughn is like the secret weapon, if you like. No pun intended with the nature of the movie. But overall, the dynamic of war, and such a unique dynamic of war. When you talk about any war film, whether it be A Few Good Men, whether it be Saving Private Ryan, whether it be 1917, you name it, Dunkirk, anything. Any kind of different depiction of war. It always involves our characters taking up arms in some way. More or less. And for this to have such a fresh approach, and such a fresh approach that's so effective, it's one of the best told war stories. And it's definitely in my top 5 war films that I've ever seen. I think Hacksaw Ridge is absolutely fantastic. And Mel Gibson, of course, being the controversial man he is, as a director, and what he does here in Hacksaw Ridge, that gets an applause from me. To get such a performance out of these actors, and even someone like Sam Worthington, who I'm not a massive fan of. I think he's okay. I think he's decent in Avatar. I think he's decent in a few other things, but this is his best performance as well. Another one that I didn't think had such a performance with such depth, characters and storytelling with such depth, even though on the outset you would imagine the story is quite set. You know what I mean? Like, they on the outset, if you're watching this film, you would just go, okay, well, he just doesn't like firing a gun, and that's it. And then the rest of his is the ones he's in the barracks and everything with, and the war and the field with. There's a dynamic with that. That's it. They just won't get on with him. But there's so much more to it, and I think that's it. I talk about this sometimes when I talk about movies, where you can have on the outset, this is what the movie is. This is what it's about. But it needs to have a core. It needs to have like a through line and an underlying heart to the film. And this film is packed with it. It's packed with emotion and chemistry between the characters, and also even in their squabbles and their arguments. So even someone like Hugo Weaving, who's in this, is also giving such... There's nobody in here that's not... And do you know what? This seems to be the theme of the day. But again, it is clear when everybody is buying so much into a project, the project comes out so good. And Hacksaw Ridge is... I said that there's the credit. And war films as a genre or a subgenre has so many fantastic films. As I say, there's a few that aren't so good, or there's a few that don't connect as well as others, but there is a lot that are absolutely... Some of the best movies are war films. Things like Saving Private Ryan will always come to mind of some of the best storytelling in a movie, not only because of the scenario and not because of the guns and everything else. It's so much more. And Hacksaw Ridge is similar in that way, where it has the premise and it has the scenarios and it has the situation that they're all put in, but it's the depth to characters, it's the depth to storytelling, it's the inner conflicts that obviously are lead in Andrew Garfield. And again, I go back to it, he is someone that I didn't know had a performance like this in him. Maybe I thought what a lot of people thought, which was he was okay as Spider-Man. The Spider-Man movies were awful, but I don't know how good of an actor he really is. And I suppose I just wasn't aware. But coming out of Hacksaw Ridge, it's clear that Andrew Garfield is fantastic. That and Social Network, of course, was the other one, which I think I mentioned at the time. Two performances of his, which shows so much depth to him as an actor, so much quality that he has. Hacksaw Ridge overall is just fantastic. And as I say, it's one of my top 5 war films. Undoubtedly. I love it so much. And that's why it's absolutely my favourite film of the year 2016. So that has been the year 2016. A good year overall. Not the most fantastic year we've had, not in the sense of depth and honourable mentions and things, but overall a good year. As I mentioned when I talked about Split, there was a few coming into this that I watched on the lead up to the year. And a few of them were honourable mentions, and obviously Split was the one that broke into the top 5. But as always, when I get to these summaries, I always like to talk about the ones that were closest to getting into the top 5. Which originally, you're maybe asking yourself, which originally had Split's spot at the 5th spot. And that was Sully, the Tom Hanks movie with the Hudson River and the plane having to land there. Tom Hanks, an underrated performance of his, who of course has appeared so many times at 5 of the best. Sully had that position, and I just love so much of Split, basically for the reason I said when I talked about it there. That was what just edged it, but Sully was the closest to being in the top 5. The other two, one that I hadn't seen going into this, making this video, which I had, I watched for making the video, I should say, and the other one, there's two. The first one is The Accountant, the second one is The Conjuring 2. Now, I'll start with The Conjuring 2, because it was one I had seen at the time, when it came out in 2016. The Conjuring 2 isn't too much of a step down from The Conjuring 1. It is undeniably slightly less effective as the first film, but it is still one of the better horror films in the last 10 years. Yeah, I would say that. It does bring some of the same effective scares as the first Conjuring. So The Conjuring 2 was also quite close. And the other one I mentioned there was The Accountant, which another one, similar to Split, I hadn't seen, at the time, but then I watched it in preparation for making this video. And it also wasn't too far away from breaking into the top 5. Ben Affleck as this kind of, a little bit of John Wick, kind of a little bit like Taken. It is that kind of ilk of character. He had his variation of that. Ben Affleck, as I mentioned before, isn't my favourite actor in the world, but The Accountant is one of his better performances and one of his better movies overall, I found. And on another year, it might have made it into the top 5. But overall, 2016 was a good year. Again, it's a little bit what I talked before, which movie years that are surrounded by better movie years. And the next few coming up in 2017 and onwards is really good. Really good. But that doesn't mean that 2016 isn't a brilliant one. There was a lot there to enjoy, especially that top 5 I would recommend to anybody. I think there's, for the Star Wars fans, for the musical fans, for the comedy fans in Deadpool, and just for great character work in things like Split, and also in Hacksaw Ridge. Just quite a varied top 5 we've had this year. A varied top 5 which kind of hits a lot of different marks. It's not just one genre. It's clear that it's not just one type of movie I enjoy. Again, harping back to what I said when I talked about La La Land, where I need to stop doing that, really. I need to stop doing that thing where I'm like, I don't think I like that film. And then I go into it and I go, what was I even talking about? And I think that's something that kind of from doing this, and kind of it started to happen to me in the mid-2010s, which I decided to just widen my horizon when it comes to movies and television and music and games and everything. But essentially, and probably most notably for me, was movies, which was movies if I wasn't fussed and I just thought, I don't think I'll enjoy that. Even if I was like, well, I might enjoy it, I never would have bothered. I never would have went to the cinema to see them. And thus, then I went, if I didn't go to the cinema, I probably won't waste my time watching it on streaming or anything like that. And then the movie just gets missed. So that it's around this time that I really fell in love with going to the cinema on a frequent basis. And yeah, I mean, this kind of shows, because yes, there was a good lot of Honourable Mentions and overall that we've talked about today and movies for 2016, but 2017 coming up in next video, there is a lot of movies we'll be discussing. I'm not even speaking English anymore. Discussing, because it's, I mean, this is a great era for movies. I always talk about that, and you know, I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people, maybe your parents, or you've talked to a lot of other people that they go, movies are decent nowadays, but they're not as good as they used to be in the 80s, or the 70s, or the 90s, or whatever the case may be. But I think there's I feel very optimistic about film overall. Obviously, I might be proved wrong, but I think, you know, even the movies that aren't so good nowadays are still at a certain level of quality. Whereas back then, there was, yes, the great films, but there's also a lot of just stinkers, a lot of films that just aren't worth the time in any capacity. I think even films now that are what we would say crap, they still have a certain level of quality in some way. There's probably something you could get from it. There's something you could enjoy. And that's why I feel optimistic about movies going forward, just in general. I think I've said this before on this and other series on the channel, where I've just talked about, I'm hopeful that movies will continue to grow and the overall quality will continue to rise because of the amount of amount of budget that gets put into these movies. You would imagine, but that doesn't always be the case. You know, throwing money at movies doesn't automatically gain success or earn you the quality that it should have. It needs to have the love, and that's been the overall. I don't know how many times I've said this today, but it seems to be the overall point that I've kind of ended up with when talking about each of these movies, which is, it's clear that the people involved, whether that just be the director or the person who wrote the movie or the actors or whatever it may be, if they love what they're doing, that clearly transcends to the audience when they're watching the movie in the end. And that's, if a movie doesn't have that, if a movie doesn't have heart, well then, what are we even doing it for? What are we even wasting our time for? You need to have a love, like we do, of movies. If they have that too, it's clear that there's a connection between the audience and the people involved. And I wish they all did that. But anyway, before I ramble any more on, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day, for sitting and listening to me talking about the movies. If you want to stick around, hit the subscribe button, ring the bell to be notified of all the future videos, leave a like, let me know you enjoyed this video, and if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye guys.
Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love everyone.